Welcome back, everyone. Today we'll be exploring the growing issue of economic inequality and its profound impact on our societies. From fueling social unrest to undermining political stability, we'll examine why addressing this gap is crucial for a fairer and more sustainable future. Stay tuned and stay safe.
Welcome to our deep dive into economic inequality and how it impacts social stability.
Right.
You've given us a really interesting mix of sources here.
Yeah.
Articles, research, even some global surveys.
It is interesting stuff.
And it looks like we're on a mission to figure out just how much this wealth gap is shaking things up around the world.
Yeah, I think that's the core of it, right?
Yeah.
It's not just a theoretical debate anymore.
Right.
You know, the data really paints a clear picture. Globally, most people see economic inequality as a major problem.
Yeah.
And many point fingers at the political influence of the wealthy. It's fueling this sense of discontent that's bubbling over in different ways,
Wow.
you know, from social movements to political shifts.
Okay, so we've got this global unease. But how bad is the actual wealth gap?
Right.
The sources mentioned that North America's average monthly earnings are 15 times higher than those in sub-Saharan Africa.
Wow.
3,500 euros versus 240 euros.
Yeah.
That's a huge difference.
It is. It highlights the vast disparities that persist. But it's also important to remember that inequality manifests differently across regions.
Okay.
Take India, for instance. It's one of the fastest growing economies,
Right.
yet their top 10% control a staggering 58% of the national income.
Wow.
This raises serious concerns about social mobility
Right.
and whether the benefits of growth are truly reaching everyone.
So even in booming economies, the spoils aren't being shared equally.
Yeah, that's a key takeaway.
And I noticed that regional disparities are a big issue in Southeast Asia, too. The sources mentioned Indonesia.
Yeah.
They seem to be doing well economically overall.
Yes.
But there's a massive income gap between Java and Papua.
Yes. Java's per capita income is 3 times higher than Papua's,
Wow.
illustrating how uneven development within a country can also fuel instability.
Right.
You know, it creates resentment, the sense of being left behind,
Yeah.
which can easily spill over into social unrest.
And speaking of unrest,
Yeah.
the sources make a pretty compelling case for the link between inequality and violence. The Arab Spring and Occupy Wall Street are mentioned as prime examples,
Right.
both ignited by feelings of economic injustice.
Those are high-profile cases.
Yeah.
But research also shows a strong correlation between high inequality and what's termed routine violence,
Okay.
like ethnic clashes, and higher crime rates.
Interesting.
This points to a deeper societal issue.
Right.
When people feel perpetually disadvantaged compared to others.
Yeah.
Frustration and anger build up.
Makes sense.
It's a recipe for instability.
It's almost like this simmering tension just waiting for a spark to ignite it.
Right, right.
But how does this translate into political instability?
Okay.
Is it just about people taking to the streets?
Well,
Or is there something more insidious at play?
it's more complex than just protests.
Okay.
High levels of inequality can erode trust in democratic institutions.
Interesting.
People feel like the system is rigged in favor of the wealthy and that their voices don't matter.
I can see that.
This can fuel support for populist leaders who exploit these grievances, offering simplistic solutions that exacerbate divisions
Right.
rather than addressing the root causes.
The sources mentioned elite capture
Yes.
as a major concern.
Yes,
And honestly, it sounds a bit ominous.
it can be.
Can you elaborate on what that looks like in practice?
Essentially, it's when wealthy individuals or groups leverage their economic power to influence policymaking for their own benefit.
So, for example,
This could involve lobbying for favorable tax breaks, manipulating regulations,
Right.
or even resorting to outright corruption.
Okay, so they're really kind of stacking the deck in their favor.
Yeah, the result is a political system that serves the interests of the few at the expense of the many.
So it's not just that the rich get richer.
Right.
It's that they can use their wealth to bend the rules of the game in their favor,
Exactly.
which further disadvantages everyone else.
And this breeds cynicism. Right. And apathy among the general population. People lose faith in the ability of democratic processes to deliver positive change,
Yeah.
creating fertile ground for political instability.
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
It is.
That even the systems that are supposed to be fair and representative can be manipulated in this way.
It's a real concern.
Yeah, it undermines the whole idea of a level playing field.
It does, and it makes it much harder to address these complex issues.
Right, because if people don't trust the system,
Exactly.
they're not going to be as engaged in trying to find solutions.
And they're more likely to be susceptible to these simplistic or even extreme ideologies.
That prey on their frustration.
Yeah, it's a dangerous cycle.
So it seems like we're dealing with a multi-layered problem here. Not just economic inequality itself,
Right.
but the ripple effects it has on social trust, political stability,
Yeah.
and ultimately our ability to solve collective problems.
It really highlights how interconnected these issues are.
Yeah. And how crucial it is to address the root causes of inequality.
If we want to create a more just and stable world,
Absolutely.
we need to start by tackling this fundamental issue of economic disparity.
Okay, so where do we go from here?
Well, I think the next step is to delve deeper into some specific examples.
All right, let's do it.
To see how this dynamic plays out in different contexts.
Sounds good.
And to explore potential solutions that are being tried around the world.
I'm ready when you are.
Let's jump in. And this erosion of trust isn't just an abstract concept.
Right.
It has real-world consequences.
Yeah.
The sources use South Africa as a case study.
Okay.
Despite transitioning to democracy in 1994, they still grapple with deep economic divides,
Yeah.
largely along racial lines.
That's a powerful example, it seems like. Even when there's a major political shift toward equality,
Right.
the economic realities can lag behind,
They often do.
leading to simmering tensions that threaten to boil over.
Precisely. And the sources highlight how this economic inequality fuels social unrest in South Africa, hindering their progress toward true reconciliation and social cohesion.
Yeah, it makes sense.
It's a stark reminder that political change alone isn't enough.
Right.
We need to address the underlying economic disparities to create a truly stable and just society.
So we've established that inequality breeds instability on a grand scale.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that it also plays out in more subtle ways. The sources dive into Indonesia's democratic transition
Right.
and how wealth concentration intensified during their commodity boom.
Yes.
How did that impact things at a community level?
Well, Indonesia's experience shows how even during periods of economic growth,
Okay.
the benefits aren't always evenly distributed.
Really?
In their case, much of the wealth generated during the commodity boom flowed to a select few,
Okay.
often those with political connections or access to resources. This created a stark divide between the haves and the have-nots. Right.
Even as the overall economy grew.
So it's not just about absolute poverty.
Right.
It's about the relative differences between people.
Exactly.
Even if everyone's income is rising,
Yeah.
if the gap between the rich and poor keeps widening, it can still lead to instability. Is that what the sources are saying?
Exactly. This sense of relative deprivation,
Okay.
of seeing others prosper while you're struggling to keep up,
Yeah.
can be a potent driver of social unrest.
Right.
It undermines social cohesion
Makes sense.
and creates a breeding ground for resentment and frustration.
And the sources point to Indonesia as an example.
Yes?
Where this economic disparity contributed to an increase in routine violence.
Right.
And social fragmentation, it's almost like this inequality fractures the bonds that hold a community together.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
When people feel like they're not getting a fair share of the pie, they're less likely to trust their neighbors,
Right.
their institutions,
Yeah.
or the system as a whole.
This can lead to a breakdown in social norms,
Oh.
an increase in crime,
Right.
and a general sense of insecurity.
So we've seen how this plays out in South Africa and Indonesia. But what about potential solutions?
Yeah, okay.
Surely there must be some policies that can help address this issue
Yeah.
and promote more inclusive societies.
There are, and the sources outline several promising approaches.
Okay.
One that consistently comes up is progressive taxation.
Okay, so the classic Robin Hood approach.
Right.
Take from the rich and give to the poor.
Yeah.
But does that really work in practice?
Wow.
I mean, won't wealthy individuals and corporations just find ways to avoid paying higher taxes?
That's a valid concern.
Right.
And certainly there are challenges with implementing any tax system effectively.
Oh.
However, the sources point to the Nordic countries
Okay.
as compelling examples of how progressive taxation can be used to fund robust social safety nets and reduce inequality.
Right. The Nordic model.
Exactly.
They're often held up as the gold standard when it comes to social welfare programs.
Yes.
But can their model really be replicated elsewhere?
That's a good question.
I mean, their countries are relatively small
Right.
and homogeneous compared to many others.
That's true. And directly transplanting their model might not work everywhere.
Okay.
But the underlying principles can be adapted to different contexts.
So what are those underlying principles?
The key takeaway is that progressive taxation, when implemented effectively,
Right.
can generate the revenue needed to invest in public goods
Okay.
and social programs that benefit everyone,
Yeah.
especially those who are most in need.
And those investments in public goods are crucial. Right?
Absolutely.
The sources mention things like education,
Yes.
healthcare, and affordable housing as key ingredients for a more equitable society.
Ensuring everyone has access to quality education,
Okay.
regardless of their background, is essential for breaking the cycle of poverty
Right.
and promoting social mobility. Yeah.
Similarly, universal healthcare systems
Right.
can help level the playing field
Right.
by ensuring that everyone has access to essential medical care, regardless of their ability to pay.
It sounds like we're talking about creating a society where everyone has a basic foundation for a decent life.
Exactly, a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Okay, but what about the workplace?
Right.
How do we address the issue of wage stagnation and ensure that workers are getting a fair share of economic growth?
That's another critical piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
The sources highlight the importance of strong labor rights,
Okay.
fair wages, and policies that promote gender equitable pay.
So, for instance?
For instance, they mention Iceland's success in closing the gender pay gap
Interesting.
through legislation and collective bargaining agreements.
So it's not just about government handouts or social programs.
No.
It's about creating a system where the labor market itself is more equitable
Exactly.
and rewards work fairly. And this includes things like raising the minimum wage, strengthening unions, and implementing policies that promote pay transparency and address discriminatory practices that perpetuate wage gaps.
These all sound like sensible solutions.
They do.
But are they really enough to tackle a problem as deeply ingrained as economic inequality?
That's the challenge.
It feels like we're up against some pretty powerful forces here.
It's certainly a complex challenge, and there are no easy fixes.
Right.
But the sources point to several encouraging trends.
Like what?
For example, there's growing global awareness of the problem, as evidenced by the surveys showing widespread concern about inequality.
Yeah, that's a good sign.
This public pressure is creating momentum for change.
Okay, so we've got public awareness on our side.
Yes.
But what about concrete action?
Well,
Are there any signs that governments and international organizations are actually stepping up to address this issue on a global scale?
there are, and one of the most significant developments in recent years has been the push for a global minimum corporate tax rate.
Interesting.
The sources mention the OECD's efforts to get over 130 countries to agree to a minimum rate of 15%.
That's a pretty big deal. But wouldn't corporations just shift their operations to countries that don't sign on to this agreement?
That's a risk.
How can we ensure that everyone plays by the rules?
That's the ongoing challenge, and it requires international cooperation and
Right.
enforcement mechanisms.
Yeah.
But the fact that so many countries have agreed to this principle is a positive step.
Okay.
It shows that there's growing recognition of the need to address tax avoidance and ensure that corporations contribute their fair share to the global economy.
So it's a step in the right direction,
It is.
but there's still a long way to go.
Absolutely.
And while these policy solutions are essential,
Right.
I can't help but wonder if there's also a role for individual action.
I think there is.
Can we as individuals do anything to promote a more equitable world?
Absolutely. Individual actions might seem small in the face of these global challenges.
Yeah. But they collectively add up to create a powerful force for change.
So what can we do?
Supporting organizations working to combat inequality,
Okay.
advocating for fairer policies, and even just having open and honest conversations about these issues within our communities
Yeah.
can all contribute to building a more just and equitable world.
Okay, so it's not just about waiting for governments or international organizations to fix things.
Right.
It's about all of us taking responsibility and doing our part.
Exactly.
And, I have to say, learning about all these different approaches, from policy solutions to grassroots activism,
Yeah.
it does give me a sense of hope.
Okay.
It feels like change is possible,
It is.
even if it's a long and winding road.
I agree. And that sense of hope,
Yeah.
That belief that we can create a better world
Mm-hmm.
is perhaps the most potent weapon we have in this fight.
Because ultimately it's about believing that change is possible.
Yes, and it's about taking action to make that change happen. You know, it's easy to get overwhelmed by the sheer scale of global inequality.
It is a big issue.
But, as we've been discussing,
Mm-hmm.
there are real tangible things being done to combat it.
Yes, definitely.
And that's what I find so encouraging.
Right.
It's not just a hopeless situation.
No, it isn't. What's fascinating is that solutions are emerging from all levels.
Like what?
International agreements, government policies, and even grassroots community initiatives.
Okay.
It really highlights how multifaceted this issue is
Mm-hmm.
and why a one-size-fits-all approach won't cut it.
The sources mention the OECD's work on a global minimum corporate tax rate,
Uh-huh.
but honestly, that feels a bit distant from everyday life.
Yeah, it can.
Are there examples of more localized solutions that are making a difference?
Definitely one of the most interesting trends is the rise of community-based wealth-building initiatives.
Okay, can you give us an example?
These programs focus on empowering marginalized communities
Hmm.
by providing access to financial resources,
Okay.
business development training, and even things like cooperative ownership models.
So it's about equipping people with the tools and knowledge
Right.
to create their own economic opportunities,
Exactly.
rather than relying on top-down solutions.
It's about empowering people to take control of their own economic destinies.
That feels very empowering.
It is, and it addresses a key aspect of inequality, access to capital.
Okay,
Traditional financial institutions often fail to serve low-income communities.
right.
So these initiatives are bridging that gap
Okay.
and fostering economic inclusion from the ground up.
I'm also seeing a lot in the sources about the importance of early childhood education.
Yes, that's a crucial area.
That seems like a surprising link to economic inequality.
It might seem surprising,
Yeah.
but research consistently shows that high-quality early childhood education can have a profound impact on a child's future trajectory.
Good.
It not only sets them up for academic success,
Uh-huh.
but also develops crucial social and emotional skills
Okay.
that are essential for thriving in life.
So it's not just about reading and writing.
Right.
It's about creating a strong foundation for a child's overall development.
Exactly. It's about giving them the tools they need to succeed in all aspects of life.
But how does this tie into addressing inequality?
Well, children from disadvantaged backgrounds often lack access to quality early childhood education.
Okay.
This puts them at a disadvantage from the start,
Right.
perpetuating the cycle of poverty and inequality across generations.
So it's almost like a domino effect?
Yes, if we don't invest in early childhood education,
Uh-huh.
we're essentially setting these children up for a lifetime of challenges.
And perpetuating these inequalities.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we break that cycle?
Investing in early childhood education for all children, especially those from marginalized communities,
Right.
is a powerful way to break that cycle.
It sounds like we're talking about a long-term investment in human potential.
Exactly. It's not just about immediate economic gains.
Right.
It's about creating a more equitable and just society for the future.
And while it can feel overwhelming,
Mm-hmm.
the sources have shown us that there are reasons to be hopeful.
Yes, definitely.
People around the world are mobilizing,
Yeah.
demanding change, and creating solutions that work for their communities.
What's really striking is that many of the most effective solutions are not top-down mandates,
Interesting.
but rather collaborative efforts that bring together governments,
Okay.
businesses, and
Yeah.
communities to work towards a common goal.
It's that sense of collective action,
Yes.
of people coming together to create a better future.
That's what gives me hope.
That really gives me hope, and it reminds us that we all have a role to play in this fight.
Absolutely. Whether it's supporting organizations working to combat inequality,
Okay.
advocating for fairer policies,
Mm-hmm.
or even just having open and honest conversations about these issues with our friends and family.
Right.
We can all contribute to building a more just and equitable world.
That's a powerful message to end on. We all have agency.
Yeah.
We can all make a difference.
And I think that's what this deep dive has really highlighted.
Yeah.
It's not just about understanding the problem. It's about empowering ourselves and each other to be part of the solution.
Well said. And remember, the fight for a more equitable world isn't a sprint.
Mhm.
It's a marathon.
It
It
is.
requires sustained effort,
Yes.
a willingness to learn and adapt,
Right.
and a belief in the power of collective action to create a better future for all.
Well said. I couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into inequality and its discontents.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Yes, and we hope it encourages you to get involved in this crucial conversation.
Until next time.
Stay engaged.